But it is now time for the panel, and joining me in the studio is former New South Wales Police Minister David Elliott and Independent MP Tania Mihailuk. Tania, David, thank you so much for coming and joining me tonight. Tania, I do want to start with you because there was an interesting poll in the Daily Telegraph and it said that 7 in 10 voters want domestic oil production ramped up in this country, and this is off the back of us needing some more fuel security, even if it means higher emissions. Is this the crisis now from voters to say, all right, we need to rethink this energy policy? Labor really need to start listening.
Look, I'm so impressed that 7 out of 10 Australians are finally waking up. I think there's been a number of us that have been calling out issues around net zero emissions and this ridiculous target that we've been forcing our Australian industries and indeed Australia to support. And it's wonderful to see finally that Australians are waking up, and 7 out of 10 Australians want to drill, as Trump says, drill baby drill. But the issue for us, of course, with Australia is that we don't have the infrastructure. We've had decades now of nobody focusing at all on extracting or fracking oil in Australia. We import our oil and we're now in a situation where we've only got, a 30-day supply, ranging between 27 to 37-day supply in Australia, when New Zealand has 90, Japan has 200, China has a year's supply of oil, so they're not too worried. But I think it's a great... unfortunately, it takes a crisis for people to finally wake up and realise that we should be energy independent in Australia. We are an incredibly resource-rich nation and we have to be energy independent. And I'm delighted to hear that is the latest poll. But the problem is a lot of people don't realise that we need billions of dollars to do this. We have no plan coming from Albanese. Bowen and Albanese have been focusing on COP31 and climate change and all sorts of issues around net zero. In New South Wales, we've got a net zero commission. Nobody's too concerned or worried about how do we actually extract our own oil, particularly given we've got about a 40-year supply in Australia. And
it is interesting, David, because with that poll, it was that a lot of Labor voters were also in that same vote, that they want to now start being energy sufficient. But I want to get your thoughts on what the Prime Minister has announced, where he did say, look, we're not going to go down a COVID mandate sort of style, but instead he announced that the government will underwrite shipments on fuel and fertiliser. But I'd love to get your thoughts on, first of all, that idea, but how do you think he has been performing as a leader during this crisis?
Well, I think he's failed the first rule of leadership, the first test of his leadership in this particular crisis, because he hasn't given confidence. He has not given confidence. You need courage and confidence in leadership roles, when, particularly when you have a crisis like this. Churchill won an entire war giving the Germans and the British people an understanding that he was confident that he was going to win. So far as these COVID-style restrictions are concerned, he had to say that, because there would have been serious civil unrest. COVID was an act of nature. The fuel crisis is an act of government. This is his fault. So if he went out and said, listen, I know I've stuffed up, I know I've failed to provide confidence for you people who are managing and directing the economy, but I'm also going to have to give you one extra, and that is fuel restrictions. Now, I don't believe him. I think we will have to go into fuel restrictions. I think they'll probably come in the middle of April. I don't know to what level, but I think that the Prime Minister has really let us down when it comes to this crisis, primarily because he has given no solid level of communication to the community, and particularly to the business community, about what the plan is.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It almost feels as though Labor don't really know what to do in this situation. But Tania, you just referred before about Chris Bowen and his focus being on COP31. And I honestly nearly fell off my chair today when I read that he has spent more than $200,000 of taxpayer money to fly a jet, or a VIP jet, to go to the Pacific Islands to campaign for the failed COP31 bid. I mean, what happened to just having meetings via Zoom?
Well, and people should expect there'll be more trips like this, because he's cut a deal for himself where he will continue to negotiate. So Australia is not the chair of COP31. We're not going to actually hold the conference in Australia, but we've cut some crazy deal where we're still going to do the negotiation. So you should expect more of this taxpayer flights around around the world. So I can understand why people are angry, but also it just beggars beyond belief that we're actually supposed to be caring for the climate and cutting emissions apparently, but it's okay to take a private jet that the taxpayer ends up paying. So, look, what a timing for this to come out. I think a lot of people will be angry to hear about it, to read about this incredible expense for something that doesn't benefit Australia at all.
No, and in that same sort of period, Anthony Albanese spent $1.3 million on private jet use. David, I want to get your thoughts on the Red Bridge poll that came out today, and One Nation's primary has now gone 1 point to 29%. They're sitting just behind Labor on 32%. And it's bad news for the coalition. Again, their primary is just continuing to slump. It's now at a record low of 17%.
Yeah.
Greens have also gone up slightly. Do you think I do think the story around here is One Nation and the fact that they do continue to grow. But I also I think that it's the Liberals that they need to be stronger of, let's get some policies out and show people this is who we are, this is why you need to vote for us.
And that needs to be done. I mean, this week you look at the Liberal Party social media out of Canberra and it's been, 4 years ago, One Nation voted in a division with the Greens. I mean, who cares? Who cares? We've got a fuel crisis and you're talking about a parliamentary division 4 years ago. So it's quite clear we've got some messaging problems. That poll today that's just been released an hour ago scares me because we are only 4 points ahead of the Greens. I remember campaigns when we've been 40 points ahead of the Greens. And this Disneyland model of politics that we've seen in the last couple of years where everybody just assumed that it doesn't matter about the policy direction that we take because Conservatives will always come back to us. Guess what? They're not. They're not coming back to us. In fact, they're leaving us in droves. And with some of those South Australian seats showing that we came fourth, if not fifth, in seats that we've always been competitive in, it's a wake-up call. Now, here in New South Wales, of course, we've got a new president, a very experienced man in Peter Collins, and we've got a new state director coming in. I think it's time for the mature heads to put on their big boy pants and they're going to need to really make sure that the messaging that's coming out is what the people want to hear. We will need to provide confidence to Conservatives that they can put their trust back into the Liberal Party because I don't think that we've hit rock bottom yet.
And just really quickly, Tania, do you think that this is the time that the coalition should be looking at doing preference deals with One Nation, perhaps on a seat-by-seat basis, versus forming a three-way coalition? Or what do you think is the way forward?
Look, the problem, my experience, particularly in New South Wales, the problem with doing a preference deal with One Nation is that support's not going to come back. Coalition might preference One Nation. The way One Nation voters like to vote is they like to choose who their preferences go to. They're not going to be dictated to by the party. In the past, Pauline Hanson and indeed other leaders of One Nation have actually directed people to choose their own preferences. So I find it'll be very interesting. It might benefit the Liberal Party to have this preference deal. I'm not sure if they're going to get those preferences back. What ends up happening every time One Nation runs in a seat against the Liberal Party is the Liberal Party loses a substantial amount of their vote and Labor ends up winning the seat. And I think if there's anything anyone could campaign on is to remind people a vote for One Nation will lead to wall-to-wall Labor governments in Australia. You've seen it happen in South Australia, brought back Labor there, and we'll see it in Victoria and you'll see it in New South Wales. So this is a problem that people need to realise.
I think the message needs to be just put Labor and Greens last on the ticket and then you can sort of choose who goes in between. Tania and David, thank you so much for joining me this evening.